is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 421. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, welcome back home. How goes?
It's going great. I flew back here from California today and got put to work immediately. So,
yeah, right off the plane, as it turned out. Welcome home. The show waits for no one, Luis. You should know that by now. We've got, finally it is time for the Ixalan Sunset Show.
Never look forward to a sunset show more.
I haven't either. We are going to bid Ixalan farewell today. We're going to go through all the normal stuff and give you our bottom line opinions on Ixalan during this episode. First things first, so I've got to mention our sponsor. That's channelfireball.com. I always mention the awesome free content. Well, I've got two great examples of it that you can find on the website this week. One of them is an article by Frank Karsten where he answers mathematically a question that has come up. I've been asked it quite a few times. I'm sure you have as well, Luis, about is it sometimes okay to play, say, 41 cards in your limited deck? The theory being, well, in some cases, it's okay to do so because it can make your mana ratio just right. I've never subscribed to this theory. I've always shot it down as nonsense, based on the logic that you want only the best possible cards in your deck, and therefore it is correct to play the fewest number possible. But I've been wrong before, and I love it when somebody takes, not just the baseline logic, but takes it out to another step, and that's exactly what Frank Karsten does in the article. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes for that one. Also, another one, by the way, Luis, one that, man, I think I've been waiting for this for a long time, from Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa. It's called PV's Rule, and it's really great. I remember way back in the day, I had a bit of a moment with Zach Hill in the booth where a player had decided to use a removal spell, and the opponent had a Spellskite and a creature that they really wanted to kill. And the player decided just to kill the Spellskite. And I said, well, Zach, to my booth partner, hey, why didn't the player use it on the creature that they really wanted to kill and at least force the other person to tap a mana or pay some life or something like that? And Zach did a pretty bad job of explaining it. He kind of brushed me off, and then the conversation kind of drifted and went elsewhere. And after the thing was over, I thought, I kind of intuitively know that you shouldn't do that, but I could never really explain it to myself why. Like, I thought the player's play was correct when the player did it, but I also thought it was an interesting talking point, which it didn't end up being. But I thought about it after, like, why? Like, I can't actually logic this out. I just kind of know that you shouldn't do that. Well, PV does it for us in this article, and it is super interesting stuff. Why don't you write articles like this, Luis? Come on.
PV is the best in the business at writing
He is
these
so
articles.
good at this stuff.
I'll stick with my basic land power rankings.
Anyway, I'll put an article for that one in there. And while you're on Channel Fireball, you know what to do. You can pick up everything you need Magic related. If you want to pick up a box of Unstable to draft it with your friends, you can do that. You can pick up those last few singles for your cube that you've been building. Maybe it's a Pauper cube or you're foiling something out. You can find it all there at channelfireball.com. They are the best in the business. The show is also brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's right. You can support the show directly. This is for people that have been asking, hey, I'd love to give back to the show. I feel like I've got a lot out of it. Thanks for doing it. How do I do this? And Patreon's the way to do it. Patreon.com/limited resources. All the information is there if you're interested. One of the cool things that you get for being a patron is you get to submit questions to the Patreon question of the week. This one comes from Jacob, who says, hello, Marshall and Luis. Enjoy the show as I listen on my commute to work. That's cool. We hear that a lot, Jacob. And I was once in that same exact position, so I know how you feel. My question is about cheating. I have read several articles and watched YouTube videos describing cheating at all levels of competitive play. The most common complaint is adding cards to your sealed and or draft pool. Have either of you personally or professionally experienced cheating, and what would your recommendation be to prevent it? Anybody ever tried to cheat you out of a game, Luis?
I've had a couple times when my opponents have, I think, like I had a life total dispute once, and I'm pretty sure my opponent was trying to pull something. And I have had an opponent who continually wasn't taking damage off their own like fetch lands and thought seizes and stuff. but I'm not 100% sure that was even cheating. But for the most part, I don't feel like people try to cheat against me very often. And like, I really can't think of very many examples. I think cheating is less pervasive than people tend to think. On the other hand, it is real. And I think if you pay attention to the game and you're very clear about what the game state is, you cut most of the, the vast majority of not only the possible cheats, but the cheats people will try to pull. Because I think the most common cheat people are going to try to pull are these cheats of opportunity, right? Like, you're not really playing against these supervillains who are palming 7 cards in their hand or drawing cards off their lap or drawing cards off their sideboard or whatever. Well, mostly what happened is, your opponent, they have a combat step and you bin your creature when it's not supposed to have died. Like, if they don't say anything there, they get away with something. It is cheating, but it's really hard to catch because even if they get caught, they're like, oh, I didn't realize you binned it and it shouldn't die. Or, they don't take damage off their fetch land and you call them and they're like, oh yeah, and they take 1. And that's it. But they actually did try to cheat. So I think being observant, it gets around most of it, because if you don't give these people the opportunity, then it's just not going to happen very often. So honestly, I think that cheating is not something you should worry about excessively, because a lot of the things that prevent it are the things you want to do for good gameplay, which is don't bin 3/3s with 2 damage on them. Pay attention when your opponent, what your opponent's life total is supposed to be. Like, you're supposed to do that when you play Magic. So that's already enough.
Yeah. I think that what you said about the crime of opportunity is really the crux of it, because I actually feel like the best advice is to make sure that you also watch yourself, because I have seen a lot of players who I know aren't habitual cheaters get caught. They said something just a little differently, or, they changed their story just a little bit to the judge, and that's cheating. That is fraud. That is lying to a judge, and that is a way to get DQ'd. And I know there's plenty of players that you and I know that are good players and they're good people, and they fell for that. And they just made a judgment error in the moment, and they paid the price for it, got DQ'd or, got caught doing it. And, I think that it shows that anybody can fall for that in a moment of weakness or in a split second decision that you don't really think through the consequences of. And I've seen this before. I caught somebody cheating at my local game store once, and this was a younger person. He was probably 15 or 14. And, he was drawing extra cards, and he was just, his opponent wasn't paying any attention, and he would just draw an extra card. And I saw him doing it, and I waited a second, and then I saw him do it again, and I said, okay, stop, and I took him aside, and I said, like, there's no judge. This was like at a Sunday draft at a local game store. So it wasn't even, I think at the time it might not even been sanctioned at all. But anyway, and I told him, I said, look, I saw what you did, and I said, you have to recognize that that's a more serious thing than you think it is. And he kind of turned red, and I was like, look, that's a big deal. Like, this person paid to be in the event, and it's not fair. I know you think it's just some kid and you don't care about it or whatever, but this matters to people, and you should be really understanding of that. And he kind of, slinked away or whatever. But I don't think that he really viewed it as that big of a thing when he did it. And I don't think it was premeditated in the way that when he walked into the store, he thought, I'm going to get these people. I think he was just losing, didn't want to lose to this kid, and just started cheating,
Well, that's the part that I hate about cheating, by the way, is the people who are the most vulnerable to it tend to be the people who already don't have high win percentages, because a lot of the way cheaters think is like, they justify it by saying, like, I don't deserve to lose to this guy. He's making 3 mistakes a turn. And so they draw an extra card, or they, do whatever shady thing. And these are the people who are also just less likely to catch you. It's part of the reason I don't get cheated against very often is because people assume I'm going to catch them, which probably is true. Like I pay attention.
It probably is. Yeah. But the truth is, and this is the thing that I always struggle with on a professional play level, because, I'm out at these tournaments doing coverage and stuff, is the type of situations that you described, where people just habitually play sloppy / cheat. It's hard to differentiate it. You don't even really need to differentiate anyway. They're both against the rules, which is, oh yeah, I forgot to take a damage. Oh, tap 4 mana, play Elspeth. Well, you don't have double white. Oh, right. Sorry. Untap. Right. I'll do something else. Right. And the problem is that most people will just be like, I've done that before. Right? Like, everybody's made a mistake like that on that level, and you just assume that that's what happened here, and you just say, yeah, just untap, you can't play it, but go ahead. And the truth is, I know it's kind of lame, but you should call a judge, because there are people who have done this, have been banned, and are back in the system again that will just do this nonstop against people who do not hold them accountable for it. And they're nice. They're really nice people. And then you're just like, well, this couldn't have been on purpose. Again, these are all plausible deniability mistakes. So in my mind, when I see that, I'm like, I got to call the judge. My opponent tried to cast a spell without mana that they didn't have. No big deal. The judge will say, okay, that's a warning. Put a little W on their slip, and off they go. They don't get a game lost. They don't get kicked out of the tournament for making a little mistake like that. But if they start doing it, over and over again, it'll show up in their warning history, and you can actually get them. So anyway, keep an eye out for it. But Luis's base point is the most important one, which is that it's not like a war zone where everybody's out to get you. It's just something that pops up occasionally, and you should be aware of it. Luis, you ready for this, buddy?
Oh, yeah.
This is our last ever Ixalan Crack-A-Pack. And it comes from Will. He says, love from Saskatchewan. Thank you, Will. What are we hoping for here? What's our best case scenario?
I think our best case scenario is whatever the person you're going to give this to would want the most.
Yes, I agree. We can go out with a bang. All right, let's get into it. First up, Slash of Talons. Fine, but
it's a playable.
By the way, if we put these next two cards in the arena, Slash of Talons really wins hardcore. It's Storm Sculptor.
Yes, that is true. I would take Slash of Talons over Storm Sculptor.
Yeah, me too. Storm Sculptor is a card I want 0.5 of in my deck. Spike-tailed Ceratops.
This is not a card I like playing.
Never, yeah. Pirate's Cutlass. There we go.
All right, that's a front runner.
Anointed Deacon, fine, but not as good as Cutlass. Stormfleet Pyromancer, no. Siren's Ruse, no. Jungle Delver, no. Raptor Companion, no.
No.
That brings us to our uncommons. It's hard to beat Pirate's Cutlass. There's a few removal spells I might take over it, but it's pretty high. Duskborn Skymarcher.
This card ended up being a little overrated. I think I would take the Cutlass.
Yeah, I'm not taking it. We'll touch on that one in a minute. All right, we got a card I will take over the Cutlass. Drover of the Mighty. Yes,
Drover of the Mighty is a 2-drop that's good at all points in the game, and it's a 2-mana 3/3 that taps for a mana. That's awesome.
Card's stupid. I love that card. Ooh, we got competition. How about Lightning Strike?
Yeah, I would just take Lightning Strike. There's nothing wrong with Lightning Strike.
Yeah, Lightning Strike's very good and very good in this format. We have a foil.
Yeah.
It's Sailor of Means. Mm-hmm. Whatever. Oh, no. You know what, Ixalan? Why do you have to be like this? Sorceress Spyglass. Which is
one of the better cards in Ixalan for the Vintage Cube, but yes.
Yeah, I did get owned by this in the Vintage Cube. I was very frustrated. It's a good card,
but I would take the Lightning Strike for sure.
Yeah, I would take Lightning Strike as well. And I'm going to send this foil Sailor of Means and this Sorceress Spyglass off to somebody in a few weeks' time, and they're going to have to just deal with it. Okay, so let's get right into this, Luis, because this is going to be kind of an interesting one for Ixalan, okay? Because the first question that we like to answer to kind of kick things off with a bang is, if you could summarize the set in one sentence, what would it be? And my sentence is this. It's the worst limited format we've had in a while, but it was still good enough to play for a while too. That's kind of how I felt about it. I mean, I drafted it still. It's not like I, started playing it and was like, oh, this is awful. I can't do this. I drafted it probably 70, 80 times. Like I drafted it actually a lot. But if I had to rank all of the, limited formats that we've had, say in the past 5 years or something like that, I'm pretty sure that Ixalan would be near the bottom. It would be in the bottom, call it 5% or whatever.
Mine is I will draft Ixalan enough times to fulfill my professional obligations.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it too. So we're not going to have this show be, a whole thing where we're bashing on Ixalan. We also got to call it like we see it.
This won't be an hour of us bashing on Ixalan because we can get through it in like 25 minutes. So,
wow, I went to try to take a drink of water and you curveballed the hell out of me with that one. But seriously, we don't want to make this like just a wine fest or whatever, but gotta call them like we see them.
Yeah. So
this was not a successful limited format by today's standards.
Here's the thing: this isn't us just going out on our own and saying this. This is, I think, a widely held opinion, and it's not for no reason. And as connoisseurs of Limited, like how many vintage cubes have you done in the last week? Like probably 20 or something, right?
Yeah.
Like I did like 3 every night, when I was visiting my family.
I was just mono jamming.
So it's not, and I did a ton of vintage masters and iconic masters. I love playing Limited. This is just not a set that made me want to play a lot of Limited.
No.
And
that's the simplest way to put it.
There's a couple things. One is we're going to dive into kind of why that is, because it's interesting to look at that and try to figure out, okay, what made it this way. This wasn't again, we all decided this. This is just what a lot of people came to. Also, what can we learn out of this, and what was good in this format? Rivals of Ixalan is going to be played with Ixalan, so we are going to be playing with these cards. It's good to analyze the cards. So we're actually going to, approach Ixalan in the way we would any other set. We're just getting a little bit out of the way in the beginning.
Yeah, one of the things that we'll talk about when we get to what we learned, but I wanted to touch on here just to put things into context, is that even though I'm ranking Ixalan in the bottom, 3 or 4 sets of the past 5 years as far as Limited goes, it turns out the bar for a bunch of Magic cards that you can booster draft and then play against other people is actually still quite high. Because if this was truly bad, right? Like if this was just plain old not fun or broken in some way where it was just like not touchable, I would not have drafted it as much as I did. And I did draft it a fair bit. So, it makes me recognize what a beautiful and unique thing booster draft is, that you can even take a set like this, which scores pretty low relative to the other sets of its era, and I still drafted it. So I don't know. We'll touch on that more as we go. Big picture, what turned out to be the best archetypes?
The one I think that was the most consistent was Black-White Vampires, Red-White Aggro, and then Blue-Green Merfolk was certainly the best when things got there.
It peaked the highest.
Oh, yeah.
But it was also the most committal. Like
its cards had the least overlap with any other deck.
Right. And if you wanted to pick Merfolk cards first, you were just putting on your seatbelt and going for the ride. And if you got lucky and got that third pick Merfolk card and said, okay, I'm just going to do it, and it was open, you got hooked up insane, right? And your deck was just much better than the rest. Some of the other archetypes ended up being fine as well. There was different pirate decks. The Dinosaurs deck never really did it for me as far as like an archetype I was actively wanting to pursue. But, there was some other stuff. But those are the 3 that really stood out. Dinosaurs
were not good. I think that you were generally unhappy if you were in Dinosaurs. It was playable, but it was not where you wanted to be.
Yeah. How did we think the set would play out after doing the set review versus how it actually played out? Because we had our initial impressions and stuff and then got our hands on it. I think we're actually pretty close for this one.
Yeah, it was a little faster than we thought, but not like as big of a difference between Emanquette and our perception of it.
Right. But we noticed the tribe stuff quickly. We noticed the weird color setup where, blue, white, and black, green didn't get gold cards and seemed less supported. And we noticed that stuff pretty early, and that stayed true. One thing that I was holding on hope for as we approached, like the first major tournament was that there would be a 4 or 5 color deck based around the blue treasure making commons like Depth of Desire, Sailor of Means, and Prosperous Pirates. I thought that we had 3 good commons, right? Those are all playable cards, and they're all like-minded in that they all slow down your opponent, either by putting out big toughness blockers or just interacting with them in a relatively cheap and instant speed way. And they all just spit out a bunch of treasure. So I thought, well, I can save up for like a 1-shot on like a 7 or 8 drop, or I can splash around a lot and try to make that work. And it turns out that while that archetype exists, it's not good. And it never really ended up being something that was like core to the deck that you were playing. It was just something that incidentally happened occasionally.
Yeah, I think that
makes me sad.
That was disappointing because that looked like the kind of deck we could really sink our teeth into.
Yeah.
And I think that the other big thing that we may have missed was that auras were just really good.
Yep, they were better than we thought for sure. And I don't think they're really good, by the way. I don't agree with you. I don't agree with anybody who says that. I think that's nonsense. I think that One with the Wind is very good.
I think is very good. Mark of the Vampire is very good.
I think Mark of the Vampire is fine. I think it's playable. I don't think you prioritize it. And I think Swashbuckling's bad. I think that there is an archetype that you can draft it, and then that's fine. You're doing the Swashbuckling thing. But if you just throw it into random decks, I find it mediocre.
Let's just put it this way. When we were at the Pro Tour, our team played all the Swashbucklings we drafted.
Yeah, which is more than I would have given credit for. But I don't take that card highly. You don't either.
No, I don't. But One with the Wind, I think, is the best blue common.
Yeah,
not to
now One with the Wind, I think, is
one
legit
of our
good.
other topics.
Yeah, I do think One with the Wind is just legit good.
That the best blue common is an aura is something notable.
It is, for sure. Yeah, the things I liked best about One with the Wind were the cheapness combined with the ability. I think it was just the best combination of any of them. And the fact that it so often was paired with green, which gave you access to Jade Guardian, where the other colors were less often paired with green. And Jade Guardian made those auras sing. You know, if you could set it up so that you could get Mark of the Vampire and a Jade Guardian, now you're in business. But that was hard to do, you know, because you didn't play that color pair very often. But yeah, I think we were pretty close to that. What were the most underrated and or overrated cards, either then or now? I mean, I've got some of the underrated cards. Like, I think Legion Conquistador was underrated.
That was, I think, might be the most underrated, just because it looked like very, very unplayable and ended up being fine because the format was all about 2/2s.
Yeah, definitely. It ended up being a totally fine backup plan. I think the auras were underrated, right? I know I underrated them. Coming out of the set review.
Dive Down was a card that I went from this looks marginally playable to I want 2 in every blue deck.
Yes, and I went from I'm not playing this to I want 2 in every blue deck, which is a major difference. I think Looming Altasaur is a little underrated as a sideboard card. I don't main deck it, but that card actually did some work in the sideboards. And I saw people at GPs and PTs going to that as a sideboard option way more than I would have anticipated. I just thought it was like maybe you run it with that whatever that Brontodon thing, and otherwise it's like, I don't really know why you'd want this card. But I often saw people going...
I did not like the Altasaur.
Oh, you never boarded it, huh?
I would board it, but I would not... It is not a card I ever took with the intention of playing or prioritized.
Really? I would pick them up, pick 12 or whatever for my sideboard.
I think your white decks ended up being a lot more aggressive.
Yeah, that did happen. But still, this is a card that I thought we would never see on the battlefield, and people did. Similarly, although less strongly, Shining Aerosaur is a card that I was just always happy with. The 3/4 flyer for 5, where I thought, given that it was a 5-drop, I thought, this might just be one of those like the same level as say a Spike-tailed Ceratops or something, where it's like, yeah, sometimes you play it, but you don't really care about it. I kind of cared about it. I thought that card was a little bit better than I thought I was going to be reading it. Same thing with Perilous Voyage, which is an uncommon, so you don't see it as often. But I really liked that card because the format ended up being very quick with a lot of cheap creatures. So you could often get the Scry 2 off of it, which is a big bonus. And when people are trying to swashbuckle you, Perilous Voyage goes a long way. And so I actually had it a little higher. I saw people passing it being like, whatever. But I had it again, just a notch up. Wasn't anything crazy. Overrated. We just talked about Dustworn Skymarcher.
Well, I'll be honest. I don't think the card's overrated. I just mentioned that because I saw that you put it on the list. Okay, well, I do.
That card has never performed well for me. The only times when I want it is if I have a Maverin Fane or, a bunch of Anointed Deacons or something like that, because it just doesn't do anything in the early stages. I'd much rather have the 1/3 flyer, for example.
It gets in for damage.
Yeah, but it doesn't block.
Yeah, but this format's not about blocking. I actually think blocking is part of the reason I don't like the format is it's impossible to block. It's not a legal maneuver in Ixalan.
I mean, I get what you're saying. It's just that's such a broad stroke because you do have to block. You just do. Sometimes they do stuff and you must block.
Skyblade of the Legion does block 2/2s pretty effectively. Yeah. And the Dustborn Skymarcher doesn't. But getting to play a card on 1 is so good.
That does feel good. I will give you that. But remember, you're giving up quite a bit, right? When you played on turn 4, the 1/3 flyer is okay, I got a card, and this is well. Also, does anybody ever activate it?
Yeah, you threaten to. There's a thing called threat of activation, and
I've never heard of that. No, that sounds like bunk.
And often they don't get to block, and then you just get to play something else. So you didn't even spend mana.
Kapala.
Well, Kapala's just bad.
Bad card. People are like, oh, I'm in Merfolk. Great. I got a Kapala. I'm like, what? You don't even want to run that thing. You'd rather just have any, 2-drop Merfolk over it or whatever. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it. Another one that I see people play a lot, but I've never really been able to feel like I'm getting great value is Shipwreck Looter. Where are you at on Shipwreck Looter?
It's a 2-drop, so I think you just always play it, but it's not, it's not a great card.
Yeah. I just see people maybe it's just the 2-drop thing, but I'm just always like, that card just never seems to perform up to what I want it to do. The 1 toughness might be the issue. I don't really know. What were the most controversial cards? I know one that I had come to mind was Skullduggery.
Yeah, for sure, Skullduggery. Given that our team couldn't even agree whether it was like the 3rd best common, the 5th best common, or playable, or the 9th best common, I don't know. I think the card's great, but there was some debate over where it was supposed to land.
Yeah, Ben S had an interesting take on it in that, he kind of adjusted it down a little bit from its peak. He didn't say it was bad or anything like that, but he just said, I like the card still, but I think it's worse than people think it is because everybody is so hyper aware of Skullduggery and will play around it whenever they can. That he felt like, you lose a little bit when everybody's like so dialed in on a card like that. Do you agree with that?
I think that Ben overestimates how much people are going to play around it. And I think even at high levels of competition, people will run into this card in ways that are favorable for you. And I think that some games are just set up such that you can't play around it. Yeah,
I'm more on the second. I think everybody plays around it. Even like people that don't play that much are just like, what do you have open? Black mana? Oh, you have Skull. It's just such a it's
just so hard to play around. And when you say play
but
around,
that part I agree with. Mm-hmm.
And you're doing some work, so it's a 1-for-1 instead of a 2-for-1. Like that's still a 1-for-1 for 1 mana.
I agree, and that's why I agree with your second point wholeheartedly that people do it. Any other controversial cards come to mind? I mean, there's a lot of cards that people didn't like, but that to me is different than controversy.
I think those were the biggest ones. I remember Pirate's Cutlass being controversial at first. And then it just got to the top of everyone's pick orders and everyone just takes it. But there was, a debate, also with Bennis, for example, was kind of weird, but where he wanted to take it over Shining Aerosaur, pick 1, pack 1. And everyone was like, wow, you're crazy. And
no, over Imperial Aerosaur.
Oh, that's what I meant, Imperial Aerosaur, the 3/3 flyer for 4. Yeah. And then like 2 weeks later, everyone's like, yeah, Pirate's Cutlass is a first pick. Of course, it's always been a first pick.
Where did you come down on that argument, by the way?
I think Pirate's Cutlass is... I don't know that I would take it over the Imperial Aerosaur, but because
I'm still on Team Aerosaur, my friend.
But I do think that it's close, and Pirate's Cutlass is amazing.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, really important question. What card had your favorite artwork?
Since I beat you to the punch, Goring Ceratops, I think that the color palette on the card is just really sweet. It just looks different than most cards.
Yeah, I used it for the background on our set review because I thought it was just absolutely flat out gorgeous. My favorite was The Death of Goring Ceratops, Star of Extinction.
Yeah, that's a really cool one.
Featuring Gregory the Brontosaur or the Brontodon or whatever kind of dinosaur he is. And I love it because I actually even put this in an article for Wizards because I don't know why. I became obsessed with this artwork on this card, but it's the best thing because like if you look really closely, he's eating. Like he's got a mouthful of leaves. Like this is how you and I are going to go out, right? Like when the asteroid comes to kill us all, we're going to have like, a taco in our hand. We look up at the sky like, yeah, what is that? What's going on with that, big bright thing? And so I don't know. I guess I feel some sympathy or empathy or whichever one I'm looking for with Gregory. This is a tough one. What were the best build around cards in this set, Luis? So you can take this one. Go ahead.
Yeah, so
I know you have a lot to say.
I think that the build arounds being a brick was a big part of the set and not delivering.
Yeah.
Because like if you ask what are the best build arounds, like does Jade Guardian count? Because you could put One of the Wind on that one, and the answer is no. It doesn't really.
It's like it's not a thing, right? That's just 2 cards working well together. We're talking about cards like Deep Root Waters and cards that say build around me and I will pay you off.
One of my opponents played Deep Root Waters the Pro Tour and they lost very badly.
I'm sure they did. Card's terrible. Oh, talk about overrated. Actually, I have a different thing to whatever. I'll save that one. But yeah, this is just the truth. And this is something that we will address later when we kind of break down the whys on why the format fell a bit short for us. But this is one of them, right? The build around cards. What were the best ones? There were no good.
If you look at the sets that we have tended to not be engaged with after the first bunch of drafts, because look, every single set is fun the first couple of drafts, and
sure, and by couple you mean like 15, right?
Yeah, and then they're going to get 15 out of you no matter what.
Yeah.
But Origins was another one where all the build arounds were traps, and you kind of heard that through the podcast, right? Every week when we're just talking, and we would bring it up. So,
yep.
I think that the fact that there's basically no build arounds in the set that really felt like they were like Sunbird's Invocation is just, that kind of thing is just didn't quite get there, and it was just unfortunate.
Yeah, I wanted it to, but it didn't. What was this a Prince or a Pauper set? This is, of course, the designation for, Pauper being, was it about the little guys, about the commons and about, assembling a team, or was it about the Prince cards, the big hitters, the bombs?
Oh, for sure it was a Pauper set because it didn't matter what rares your opponents had if you had, a very good curved red-white deck or a one with the wind Jade Guardian deck.
Yeah, and that's what we would expect from a tribal set, right?
Yes, and the fact that some of the best rares were good does not detract from that, because the best rares are going to be good in every set. The top 2 or 3 cards are always going to be great. But this set, your deck lived or died on the commons a lot more. Like you couldn't get bailed out by the rares very often.
No, there was a few that could, but like you said, that's always the case. What was the biggest groan test? The card that they play and you're like, oh my God. And I knew exactly what it was for me. And it was Charging Monstrosaur. Somehow that stupid card, if they cast it on turn 4, God forbid, because that was a possibility, right? There was the Drover plus the Huntmaster guy, and they could just slam that thing and jam. And even then, if they played it on turn 5, it still was a big problem. If you didn't untap and have an answer right now, like kill that immediately, you just felt dead.
Well,
because
even if
you'd cast another creature. Yeah. You already took 5. And then you would be like, okay, I'm going to cast my second or third creature, go. And you're looking and you're like, well, I could double or triple block or whatever. But your opponent untaps all their land, plays a land. They're playing red, white or whatever. And they're like, attack with my Charging Monstrosaur. And you're just like, so I'm going to double block here, ensuring a 2-for-1. Like, I lose both of my creatures to your Charging Monstrosaur if everything goes the way that I want it to. And if you have a combat trick or removal spell or any instant speed way to interact with any creature in Magic, I'm basically dead. You 2-for-1 me, you still have the Monstrosaur, and there's just nothing I can do unless I get lucky and rip a removal spell. That is the definition of the groan test right there. So congratulations, Charging Monstrosaur. You won this one with flying colors.
So I agree with all the things you said. And in a normal set, this would be the front runner. I think One with the Wind might actually win for me, because even though the groan is not quite as deep and resonant as the groan when they play Charging Monstrosaur, it just happens 3 times as often or whatever.
It's true. And sometimes it happens on turn 2. Like, seriously, right? Like, Kumena Speaker, go. Island, One with the Wind 4 is like, oh, come on, right? Like, the format's just not set up to interact with that,
I mean, one of the guys we knew lost to an opponent who only played 2 lands the entire match in each game. It was just juggled over One with the Wind, One with the Wind, One with the Wind, and that was it. Just both games. Like,
what do you think their opponent was thinking there?
Yeah, it was not the most fun match ever played of Magical cards. And I think One with the Wind, it really put the question to you: answer this or die. The difference between the Monster and One with the Wind is if you answered Monstrosaur, you often still lost because you had taken 5 and you tapped out just to get to parity. Mm-hmm. When you answer One with the Wind, you usually win. Because
that's true.
You do 2-for-1 them. But
that's true.
One with the Wind just happens so often, and you just take it and you just put it in your blue-black or red-blue or blue-green deck, and it was just great there. Or your blue-white deck, put it on Bishop Soldier, just get in there.
Just get in. Yeah. No, that's a very solid addition to that. What was the most frustrating, air quotes, bad card to lose to? The card you'll not miss playing against? Maybe a card that really annoyed you. For me, it was Swashbuckling. I'm just like, look, I get it. There's a deck around it. You can play it. It's like, I'm conceding that point. It is a playable Magic card. I understand. But it doesn't mean that every time you draft it, you just play it. It doesn't mean that every time you play it in a game or somebody plays it against you, that was the right thing to do or the best thing for them to do. Because you're opening yourself up for a huge problem if you get 2-for-1 there. And that happens a lot. And when you can't, when you just can't 2-for-1 them and they just start running you over with it, it's just like, come on. Like, I don't want to lose to this. Like, if they play One with the Wind, I'm like, I get it. Like, there's a game plan around that that's much more solid and that makes a lot more sense. When people bring in or play Mark of the Vampire, that card has a major impact in a format where you're trying to race a lot, right? And I get it. That makes more sense. And people tend to kind of hold that one back and kind of wait for the dust to settle and then be like, Mark hits you and you're like, crap, like I just used my removal spell last turn. But swashbuckling? No, not swashbuckling. And I hated losing that stupid card. The good news is I almost never did. I seriously, like I could almost always find a way to interact on some level and then, turn that victory around.
For me, it was definitely Blight Keeper, the 1-mana 1/1 flyer, because it almost felt like it shouldn't be a card, and it was just like, wow, they just put this card in their deck. It's going to be a blank so often, but they played it on turn 1. It's gonna hit me like 4 or 5 times, and maybe later in the game they'll sack it, and it just always seemed to just quite get there. Even though at the end of it, I knew the card's not actually bad, but it just looks so bad to me, and I always got really annoyed when I lost to it. Also, I just have played this card a lot now, so I can't really complain, but it does still seem bad, and it still annoys me when it's on either side of the table.
The funny part is that if you combine the two, I'm not that sad to lose to that.
Yes, that is a great combo.
Right, because that's just a good combination and a way to apply a huge amount of pressure early and try to get your opponent dead. This is the Christian Calcano method or whatever. And to me, okay, I'm behind that, because if you're swinging for 3 in the air on turn 2, it is hard for your opponent to answer that in a timely fashion. Like, it's going to get in for 6 or 9 damage. Then they're going to be like Pious Interdiction and get their 2 for 1. But you've gotten a lot out of that if you have other ways, other reach cards or other ways to push through damage. So strange that if you combine the two, I'm like, yeah, okay, you did it. What was the bombiest bomb, the card you hope to open up pack 1, pick 1, or in your sealed pool? This is hard because there's a lot of very good bombs in this set. What would you have as number 1?
I think Hostage Taker is the very clear number 1 because
I have number 1 Hostage Taker also.
It's cheap enough that you can play it early if you need to, but also great with 10 mana. It's splashable. It's in a tribe that has some synergies like March of the Drowned and Siren's Ruse, and when it works, it just completely swings.
I mean, it's a 3-for-1, right?
Yeah.
Like, they don't print those very often. Honorable mentions, by the way. Few cards that just popped to mind. Regisaur Alpha. Reggie's great. Vraska Relic Seeker. That's the one I'd actually have second to Hostage Taker. The card's very difficult to beat. One of them that we don't talk about, maybe because it's mythic, is Vona, Butcher of Magan.
Yeah, it's a great
I found
card.
that card to be awesome. Yeah, that card's great.
It's an amazing card, yeah.
Yeah. Sanctum Seeker.
Yeah,
yes,
Sanctum
no?
Seeker, I think it's one of the premium cards you would, like, these are all cards you would never pass if you open them with, in a pack without like a foil or something like that. So they're better than all the uncommons, except an uncommon has snuck onto this list.
Am I crazy to put Charging Monstersaur on this list?
You are not. The Charging Monstersaur is one of the pick 1, pack 1, just absolute bombs.
The hell? I knew it. I just put it on. I'm like, I feel weird. I wrote, and somehow Charging Monstersaur.
Well, most of the time, commons or uncommons never make it on here, but Charging Monster is that good.
Yeah. Wow. Now this next section is really interesting this time around because it's what's the best common for each color. And normally I just will like bang out this list and I'll go, hey, Luis, just double check. And you'll be like, yep, we're good. And cause usually there's some level of consensus, but I found this one actually more difficult for a lot of the colors. So I ended up putting multiple options and Luis and I kind of settled on one together. So we'll start with white, which was the one that I did not put multiple options on. I thought this was just the best card, which was Territorial Hammer Skull.
Yeah, this is hands down, and some people have it as the best overall common.
Right. So that one was clean, but all 4 of the rest of them were like, well, what are we doing here? Blue. I had like Water Trap Weaver or maybe Siren Lookout.
Yeah, I think One of the Wind is, clearly the best common in blue.
Jeez, clearly?
I think it is wrong to take either of those other 2 cards over One of the Wind. Like, not later in the draft, but at the beginning, for sure, One of the Wind is better.
Now, are you bumping it up because of its synergy with Green and Jade Guardian? Or would you just not care? Like, if you were blue-black, you're just like...
Honestly, when you just put One of the Wind on your, Heartless Brute and just get in there, like...
I mean, that's good, but I have a counter-argument. What if they kill your you're giving up a lot.
The removal is just bad and scarce. And also, One of the Wind, you almost always get a big hit in. Because look at it this way. I hate
that argument, by the way.
Look at it this way. One of the Wind is often like you play it on turn 2 or 3 or 4 and just if they don't have anything, you run away with the game, right?
Yes.
If you draw it and have a good curve and don't need to play it, or you have it draw it a little later, it's sometimes just 2 mana deal 5 or deal 6.
True.
Which is also great.
Yeah, I think you've talked me into it. We're going to say One with the Wind is the best common in blue. Black, I had Contract Killing, but also have Vanquish the Weak on the list. You and I decided on Contract Killing,
I think
right?
it is going to end up being Contract Killing. I guess we're at the end of the format, but I think Contract Killing is ultimately the card that did more than Vanquish the Weak did. Being able to hit aura'd up creatures is very important.
Yeah, I agree. Red, I had Fire Cannon Blast and Fathom Fleet Firebrand. Where did we come down? I still don't know where I'm at.
Firebrand, which is crazy to me, but Fire Cannon Blast is a 3 mana spell that's going to trade for a 2 to 3 mana spell a lot of the time. Yeah. Like I said in one of the last podcasts, we talked about Ixalan, months ago probably.
That was by
whenever
design,
I cast Fire Cannon Blast, I always felt like I was like not doing well because I was just never getting an advantageous trade. Whereas Fathom Fleet Firebrand's a 2-drop that's relevant later, and it's a relevant creature type, so you're just going to take Fathom Fleet Firebrand.
Now, I will remind you that you can get favorable trades with Fire Cannon Blast, right? I mean, you can kill a 6,
you can kill
6/6 with it or something. I mean, it doesn't happen that often, but we don't want to forget that. Huh. So you think it's Fathom Fleet Firebrand?
I think it is.
How close do you think it is?
I think it's close. And I think that you will sometimes take the other card, right? Yeah. Later in the game or in the draft when you have more 2-drops. But I think that early you're supposed to take the 2-drop.
All right. I'm going to take the Fire Cannon Blast, but I don't actually know if that's correct. Green. This one was really hard because these commons are kind of stinky. Like River Herald's Boon, Tishana's Wayfinder, Deeproot Warrior were the ones that came to mind. I mean, we're not taking like the 3/4 with Reach or whatever, right?
No. I think that these 3 are really the only candidates.
Jade Guardian?
I don't think you're supposed to take Jade Guardian over these early in the draft. They'll clearly move up later.
So if that's the case, then we're kind of leaning over into the Merfolk side of things. And which one do we want in a Merfolk deck? Well, River Herald's Boon is clearly the highest upside card, but let's just say it's pack one, pick one, right? Or, what's the card that gives you the most consistent value? And I don't think it's River Herald's Boon. I think it's Deeproot Warrior.
I think that Deeproot Warrior is where you're supposed to start. I think that River Herald's Boon, again, it's part of this whole deal is that you take a River Herald's Boon and you end up in like green-white and the boon might not make your deck, whereas Deeproot Warrior is always going to be good. So you should start with Deeproot Warrior.
Yeah. It feels bad, man. I'm not a big fan of that, but that's where we landed, Deeproot Warrior. This one was about the easiest we've had ever. What was the mythic uncommon for this set? Everybody together, Charging Monster Sword. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows. And it's just, that was really not close either. It's one of the best uncommons I've ever seen for Limited. It's just, like, again, we mentioned it in the bombiest cards of the format list somehow. Not that it won that prize, but like just to even get a breath of air with cards like Vraska Relic Seeker and Hostage Taker is just absurd for an uncommon. So we all bow to you, Charging Monster Sword. It's your set. We just live in it. What was the worst card in the set? Biggest blank, the last pick. So normally what we'll do is we'll pick a really narrow rare that just never, ever, ever sees play. But we're not doing that this time. This time, we're going after Blinding Fog. Because Blinding Fog is so annoyingly bad, it isn't even a fog. Like, if it were just a fog, I would say, yeah, okay, in 1% of all games it gets sideboarded in or something, and I'd look further down the line for something worse. I can't. It doesn't even prevent damage to you. It's so bad.
I mean, I wanted to say Demolish or Spreading Rot, but technically you can side them in against the flip cards that turn into lands.
The funny part is that Blinding Fog is a card you can bring it out of the sideboard for the second ability, which gives all your creatures hexproof if you just have to protect the bomb.
The actual answer is Primal Amulet then, right?
Yeah, it's something like that, exactly. But we're still not changing it because this card has the word fog in the name and is just not a fog at all. And that is offensive. So sorry, Blinding Frog or whatever you're called. You got the worst one. What was the most begrudgingly playable card in this set? I picked Queen's Commission.
I think for me it was Shipwreck Looter because This was the card that made it so clear to me that I had to play every 2-drop ever. Mm-hmm. And it's not that the card itself was that bad. It was not the 23rd card. It was like the 16th card. But just looking at it was like, wow, this is what this format's about. I'd have to play every card with that costs 2 mana that has power and toughness.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I was just like, I think Queen's Commission's an okay Magic card.
It's fine.
But it just kind of routinely underperformed, and I was like, oh, fine. You made it. You did it. You make vampires. I have vampires. I'm going to play you. Is there a card you're going to miss drafting?
I liked Siren's Ruse. I found that you could actually do some pretty sweet things with that. You know, flicker your Explorer Pirates and get extra treasures. And I thought at the beginning there would be a sweet blue-black pirate deck, and it wasn't really the case, but I did like doing it.
Yeah, I liked casting Prosperous Pirates. I just found that card to be very pleasant all around. It bumped your mana, it fixed your mana, and it produced my favorite power and toughness on a creature, which is a 3/4. And I just find 3/4s to be very good utility creatures. They block well, they can attack well, they tend to hold the ground. And I'll just kind of miss it. I think that was a really well-balanced, well-designed card. And, nothing beyond that. What was the LSVEist card and the Martialist card?
For me, it's certainly Sanguine Sacrament.
What does that even do? That's the life game.
Gain double X life and then put this on the bottom because the dream with this card, which I even got to achieve once, is deck your opponent by just casting it every turn.
No way, really?
It was actually complicated.
You did that?
Because I had Advance's blasting cannons out, so I had to time it and because I was also exiling the top card of my deck every turn, but I was able to figure it out. That was my last Ixalan draft, by the way. I knew
you went deep. You went out on a high note. The Martialist card was Water Trap Weaver.
Oh, of course.
The tempo card. Also 2 and a blue for a 2/2. What was my Soapboxiest card?
You don't even like these cards, right?
What?
You don't even like Mana Wars or tempo cards. You're just like the guy who said he likes owls once, and you just get all the owl gifts every Christmas. Your relatives just buy you an owl mug or owl
That
socks.
is completely untrue. I love these cards. That's
the funny part. It's fine that
I would have moved off of it, but it's actually true. I really love playing cards like this. This is the thing that makes me enjoy Magic the most. The thing that makes me enjoy Magic the least is my Soapboxiest card, which is stupid Deeproot Waters, which I had to talk people off the ledge on constantly throughout the course of this format. Well, people would send me pictures.
The Build-Arounds is this says, hey, if you got a bunch of merfolk, this will reward you. So people are like, hey, Marshall, I've got a bunch of merfolk. Should I play this? And then you're just like, no.
Yeah. And the line I always gave on it was like this. I was like, what do you think of Queen's Commission? And they would be like, it's okay. And I'm like, yeah, right. You play it sometimes. It's just not great. Yeah. I'm like, okay, so here's your Deeproot Waters, which when you play it does nothing. Go. Right. And remember, you're getting beaten down half the time in this format or whatever, because it can be quite brutal and quick. But you just played a 3-man enchantment that did nothing and said go. Then you untapped and played a merfolk, which doesn't always happen, but it did this time. And you got a 1/1 with hexproof. I'm like, okay, good job. And then the next turn, you did it again. You actually untapped and played another merfolk, which is, again, not even likely necessarily. Depending on your deck, it could happen. But you did it. You made 2 of those things. And now you have still worse than a Queen's Commission. And it took you 2 extra turns to do it, probably. Not impressed. No, I think this card's just completely bad. And it kept trapping people, like you said, into saying, well, but I've got all these merfolk. No. Deeproot Water. Okay, I'm going to step down for my deep breath. Okay. What card do you still have to read when it's cast against you? For me, it's stupid Prying Blade. I never play that card. I think it's really bad. And I just think the impact on the game is just far too low. And so I'm always like, wait, how much is it to equip that stupid thing? And because I always forget. And then I'm like, what do you get? You get a clue. And they're like, dude, there's no clues in this. What is it? A treasure? Yeah, you get a treasure. Okay. And what does it have to do? Is it just like if it attacks, does it have to deal damage to me, a player, creatures? I always have to read that stupid card. And it's always like disappointing every time I do.
For me, it is a Verdant Rebirth. Return a creature.
Yeah, what does that even do?
I always think it returns to play, but until an turn target creature gains, when this creature dies, return it to its owner's hand, draw a card. And I always like...
You always want it to be good instead of bad?
Right. Exactly.
Did you check this? I don't think you checked this. What was your most drafted card on Magic Online? For me, I was actually kind of happy. It was Territorial Hammerskull.
Oh, that's
which is really
That
weird.
is odd.
I never ever have a card that's actually really good. Like my second one was Unfriendly Fire, which is a good card, but not a great card. But normally it's like, something fringe playable that I value a bit higher than other people. But somehow it was Hammerskull this time. I actually don't know why.
Huh. Well, I actually have Mono.
Maybe I overvalue.
So, my most drafted card on Magic Online was a tie between Tishana's Wayfinder and Siren Lookout, 2 3-mana explore creatures.
Oh, man.
I have 11 of each.
Well, we know. Wow. You did fulfill those professional obligations and move right along, didn't you? Okay. A couple more questions before we wrap
To be fair, I drafted on more than one account, so this wasn't...
I do that too.
That wasn't it.
I didn't have that many of them either. I think I had 15 or 16 or something. But I'm just happy that I actually had a good card in my list. I'm still surprised by it.
Mine were good.
Yeah, actually, yours were good. Yeah, weird. We're a weird set. Okay, this is a big one, Luis, because this is the rare chance where I really force you to put on your designer hat here and break things down for us. Because the question is, from a design and development perspective, how did this set fare? How were the mechanics? What were some of the wins, some of the losses?
So there were some good points. I'm going to start with those. I think the flavor was excellent. Dinosaurs, pirates, and vampires are all very cool. Merfolk are okay, but dinosaurs especially are really sweet. And the whole like vampires as conquistador thing was cool. And pirates are I like the story that they all told. Fiery cannonade dealing damage to all non-pirates, and Star of Extinction was just great flavor. So
yeah,
that part matters. And there were a lot of cards which were resonant, right? They did the thing that you would expect. They were, I think doing a good job of like translating the flavor in the world. Explore is a really cool mechanic. I actually think Explore is quite a good mechanic.
A lot of individual cards were really strongly designed.
And mechanic-wise, Explore, I think, is just legit good. I think Tribal tends to be a very cool mechanic, too. People really love Tribal. I think that where this went wrong, though, is it's like Tribal's on both sides. Like, when Tribal is done well, it's very cool. I think that the bad parts were ultimately louder than the good parts, and that's where we ended up where we did. One is that we already mentioned build-arounds didn't get there, so that leads to the drafts feeling the same more often because there aren't these unique experiences like, if Revel and Riches was good and you're trying to get to 10 treasures, that's just a different experience. And if Deep Root Water is good, there's like a Merfolk tokens deck 1 out of every 7 times you draft Merfolk, that was different. That'd be a different experience. It just wasn't there. There weren't very many mana sinks. The cycle of keepers like Blight Keeper, Ixalan's Keeper, whatever, those weren't real mana sinks. They just weren't good enough. So there was no real protection when you had 6 or 7 or 8 lands and you just ended up flooding out a lot, which was not a ton of fun.
Right.
The bad part of Tribal is that the themes were linear enough that when you were drafting one, you are often boxed out of drafting others, and there weren't very many cards that bridged the gap, that helped you go different directions. So you would look at these Merfolk cards, and it's like River Herald's Boon is insane if you're in Merfolk, very bad if you're not, and there's no middle ground. There's not a whole lot that gets you from one place to another. You did have cards like Tishana's Wayfinder, right? That 2/2 Explore Merfolk for 3, which was good in Dinos and Merfolk. Just needed more cards like that, I think. There was a low density of playables, and this is one really hurt. Because honestly, the gameplay of Ixalan wasn't the biggest problem. I'm not saying the gameplay was great because I think there were some valid complaints about that, but I think that the most people who didn't want to play Ixalan really took offense to how the drafting felt.
The draft itself. Yeah. I mean, we there was a term that people would use called getting Ixalan.
Yes. And when you have a low density of playables, then you can't switch very often, which means that you're just going to take the interesting part about draft is figuring out when you should switch pick 4 or pick 5, try to find the open lane. Here it's like, if I start with 3 Merfolk cards, I'm just going to try to draft Merfolk, even if it's not open, because you can't switch pick 6 or you just know you're going to end up with a train wreck.
Right. And you mentioned that in the context of having fewer playables, how risky that ends up being, right?
And fewer good cards, so you're just not going to get a good 7th pick card. Like part of the reason you switch in a different format, right, is that you'll get a 7th pick signpost card for your deck that's a good reward. That just wouldn't happen in Ixalan because the packs are so dry that those were all gone.
Exactly. And you didn't have the wiggle room. You couldn't just say, well, my first 4 picks, I'll just abandon it.
Right. And so that leads to like an on-rails draft experience, which was just in a way that wasn't very fun. And then the format was just kind of low interactivity. So it wasn't that there was just one big thing, and it wasn't like everything about Ixalan was bad. It just had a lot of things that added up in a way that I think led to just the format, at least for me, not being very enjoyable. And I'm not alone in that. So the low interactivity stuff like the auras being good, One with the Wind in particular, just being like answer me or lose, and you can't block me either. The speed, it's not that a fast format's inherently bad, but if you missed your 2-drop, you felt like you were going to lose a lot of the time, which meant fewer decisions, and it was like a choke point of like, did you have a 2-drop or not? Blocking, the fact that you couldn't block effectively when you have cards like Territory or Hammerskull, cards like Deep-Root Warrior and Tilonali's Knight, which trigger on attacks, it means that it exacerbates the fact that you miss a 2-drop. Because it used to be, if you miss a 2-drop, but then play a decently sized creature on turn 3 or something along those lines, your opponent can maybe not attack you, or you play a 3/4 on turn 4, right? Your favorite block of stats. Well, here you're just still not going to be able to block. They're just going to be able to punch through you. And that just led to less interactivity overall, which I think just combined with all that meant that sometimes you had a draft where you felt like you didn't have much decisions leading into games where you felt like you didn't have many decisions. And at the end of that, it's like, this isn't why we love Magic, right? So
right. And you know what I think that speaks to, by the way, is the longevity, right, of the format. Because you mentioned it earlier. When we get our hands on a whole new set, I don't care what's in the set. It's interesting. We have a lot to talk about. We're doing set reviews. We're preparing to be in the booth or play at the Pro Tour. And there's a lot of questions to be answered regardless. But the thing that happens after that is that we do answer those questions, at least somewhat satisfactorily. And then once we do, now what's left? And here, well, the answers weren't great, right? And they made the format, feel less attractive to limited play over the long term. Now, most people don't draft the way that we do, right? And our listeners do. Most people will draft, a few times when it comes out, maybe once a week at the local shop or something like that. They're not looking at draft number 50 and 60 and 70 like we do. But we do, and that's something that we keep in mind. And they have certainly shown, Wizards has shown that they can produce sets that are very interesting into the, almost into this, triple digits of drafts or whatever. And that's kind of the bar that we hold them to. Did you have anything else for the design development stuff?
I think you did a good job of summing that up.
What did the format teach us? So this is, how did it make us better at limited? What are the takeaways, the things that we changed our mind on? And I had a few things on this that touch on some of the stuff that you just said, but, and it kind of just recaps some of the stuff that we just talked about. One of them is that even though a set, is bad, right? Like this, again, we're judging it relative to other sets. It's still good enough to play, to talk about, and to be interesting at least for a while, which it kind of relieves me, to be honest, because if this was just completely dead, I would be really bummed out because I do spend a lot of my time and effort thinking and doing this stuff, and it was still interesting to me. It's just, again, for hardcore drafters like us that it can get a little stale after, 50 drafts or whatever. 2, I don't really like tribal sets that much. This is a personal thing that this set kind of brought out in me because, there's been a few tribal sets that I've been playing, but like when I started playing, it was in Shadowmoor and Eventide, which was right after the really truly tribal block, which was the Lorwyn block stuff. And, I never really put that together until playing this one, but I just don't like the draft on rails where you've got these lanes that you need to get into and they work, and then other ones just kind of don't. And they make you fend for yourself with your picks or make your deck the sum of its parts rather than having a synergy built into it or something like that. I don't like that. I also didn't like excluding color pairs. They ended up being, one of them ended up being fine. The blue-white deck was fine. The green-black deck never really seemed to come together, even though they threw it a couple of bones with the 2 uncommons, but they just never really worked. And I find it that like when only a few lanes are viable anyway, it just makes it hard to limit those even further. Cause like when I sit down to do an Ixalan draft, I'm just thinking like, there's a few decks that I'd really like to get, and the rest I'm going to have to get super lucky, like to get a bunch of really good cards to make those decks work. And I don't like that. I like my absolute favorite part about booster drafting is opening up the first pack and genuinely not knowing what's going to happen by the end of the draft. And I like that feeling to last as long into the draft as possible. And usually it's, pick 4, pick 5, pick 6. I start like developing what I think the deck's going to look like. But I love it when I don't know for sure. And here I felt like I did. If I took a vampire card first and I got past 2 good vampire cards, I'm like, well, here we go. And what would normally be, 13 cards to choose from or 12 cards or whatever ended up being like 1 or maybe 2. And I would just take those cards. And then for the whole rest of the draft, if those cards were there, my deck was great. And if those cards weren't, I just had to grit it out and take some kind of junkers for my deck, because God forbid if I wanted to switch lanes, if I didn't do it right away, I knew I was going to be short on playables or at least have a deck that didn't live up. And I didn't like that. I didn't like feeling walled in during the draft that much. The third thing that I take away, which you touched on as well, was that the mana sinks in the format, places to put your mana in the late game and viable build arounds are something that I personally tend to value really highly. Like whenever those are gone, I find that the set doesn't last as long for me and I don't enjoy it quite as much. And when those are a part of the format, like think of cons, right? Where you had Morph, which just had built-in mana sinks in late game all the time. You think of Hour of Devastation. Similar. There were so many different places to put your mana in the late. Our favorite was River Hoopu, but there was many that you could do that and that you could actually generate real value and make that work. I like that's what I really enjoy in Magic. And when those are missing, it hurts. I feel it. And I'm putting this out as a personal preference, not necessarily as this is how Magic should be, because I don't know. There could be people that don't care about that and want to beat down, and that would be doing them a disservice to make a bunch of formats like that. But I've definitely had it hammered in my head after Ixalan that those are things I really highly value and I want in a set.
The biggest thing for me was, man, auras are just sometimes better than they look. And I think that between the cartouches in Amonkhet and the auras here, might be that auras are just better now.
They are.
Format
they
to format.
Are.
So
they are. I mean, as the removals really gotten worse. To me. Yeah, and they've gotten worse. The removal, I wrote an article about this a few years ago, comparing what the common removal was to the common removal from like 4 years prior, and it was just a joke. It was 6 mana versus 2, instant speed. Unconditional. Like they just made a huge philosophical shift away, and that's totally fine. Our job is just to adjust. I don't have any problem with that, but part of our adjustment has to be putting good auras higher. And we do. I play them now, right? Like back then, 5 years ago or whatever it was, I wouldn't play them at all. Because it's just like you're just begging to get Doombladed out of the game. Now, no, you like we talked about with One with the Wind, they take 9 or 12 damage and then they get to kill it because their removal costs 5. Well, the damage is done. They're not getting that back. And I think that's a really good takeaway here, because we've started to see that pattern as they've made these cheap, these 2 mana auras really go well. All right, last question. Luis, what was your favorite card of the format?
Vance's blasting cannons.
What?
Because it led
Vance's
to that Sanguine Sacrament.
Oh, God. Just because of that one win?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. You really pledged allegiance to Vance here, huh?
I mean, the runner-up was Star of Extinction, because that deck or that card really could make a deck do sweet things, though I still don't think that sort of stuff was good.
No, I wish it was, but it wasn't. Yeah, like we mentioned a minute ago, a lot of really strong individual card designs in this set. I mean, stuff that was just like, in my mind, like design home runs, right? Like Star of Extinction is just too good, right? Like it blows up the world, and the fact that they have it destroy a land is just too good, right? It just craters some, mountain or whatever when it lands. That is fantastic design, really great stuff to put in a dinosaur set. And the one that stood out to me as an absolute pinnacle in this set of that was, and also a card that I just love to play, was Treasure Map. That was my favorite card in Ixalan because it was huge value, right? Like, I mean, you could turn it into drawing 3 cards after scrying a bunch of times and maybe even drawing more cards. Or, you could use the land plus the treasure that you made from it to cast stuff that you couldn't cast prior, which I think is just a really neat kind of 1-2 punch there. Neither of them being too strong, right? Drawing 1 extra card to turn off your treasure map and having to tap that land for it. never felt broken. It just felt strong. And getting all the treasure, if you needed to spend it on that, meant you weren't going to get the cards. So you had to make a strategic choice late in the game. And I love that. Also, I just thought that the design on Treasure Map was really good too, right? You're kind of plotting your way through this map, and then boom, you get there and you get the reward for it. And I think that's really cool. I wish we had more cards like that around.
Yeah, Treasure Map's a pretty sweet one.
Okay, that's going to do it for this one. We're going to be gearing up for Rivals of Ixalan to see how things change going forward. I mean, we can make some assumptions about Rivals, but at the same time, we have to remember like how much Hour of Devastation changed the format for Amonkhet. It was just a complete game changer, flipped the whole format on its side and turned it from one that you and I were both fine with to one that we both loved. And that's always a possibility. So we'll be keeping a close eye on the preview cards and stuff. Next week, we have preview cards from Rivals of Ixalan, and we'll also be going over the rules and interactions from that to see if there's anything new or exciting on that front. Once we get the full card list, then we can start to break those things down. I want to remind you about our sponsor, channelfireball.com. They're the place to go for everything you need Magic related on the internet. And of course, while you're there, sell your cards to them for the love of all things. You have a pile of random rares sitting around. Those are not doing you any good. Turn them into better rares or booster packs or whatever, because when you send them into Channel Fireball and you do it for store credit, they give you a 30% bonus. 30%. That is a massive bump on these things. It eats up a big portion of it, and bang, you're back in business. You can get a booster box or something along those lines. And while you're there, awesome free content, the full selection of everything Magic related, you know the deal. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com, including links to our streams and our different, YouTube channels and all that kind of stuff. And to the subreddit, the LR subreddit. It's always a great place to go to ask questions. If you're looking for that, you can find the link for that on lrcast.com. All right. Thanks so much for hanging out with us this week. Next week, we'll start gearing up towards Rivals of Ixalan. We'll see you then.
Got a quick one for you this week, but I do want to talk about how I got one of my favorite shirts. So we were at the Pro Tour in Nashville, and there's a restaurant called Hattie B's, which makes great hot chicken.
We went. How many times did we go? I'm so hungry right now, too.
And we go there, and Marshall very generously says, "Get whatever you want, I'll pay for it." I don't know. You were feeling generous. You decided to treat me to dinner.
Yeah, I like you.
Yeah. And they had these shirts for sale right next to as you're waiting in line, and the line was kind of long.
It was really long. We stood in it for half an hour.
And I was like, yeah, what if I grab a shirt? And you're like, yeah, okay. And then cut to 20 minutes later, we're checking out, and there's a shirt on the counter, and the cashier's ringing it up, and you look at me, and you look at the shirt, and you look back at me, and you're like, really? I'm like, you said get anything. Were you lying?
And I'm like, I wasn't lying. But you still wear that shirt.
Oh, I wear it all the time. In fact, I specifically wear it when I know I'm going to see you.
I love it. I was looking at some of your photos from your holiday trip, and you had it on. I'm like, oh man, he's still rocking the Hattie B shirt.
That makes me hungry. It's one of my favorite shirts. And look, I think it's net upside, and here's why. Because the $20 on the shirt, whatever, you don't care about that. It's a great story, and now every time you see it, you're reminded of it. So I think that we both profited wildly. I got my value more since I got a shirt, and you paid for it. But it's just a small note and a shirt I really like. So thanks again.
You're welcome.